Hello world, welcome back to the Razor RC, and it's time for the full review of the Hobao Racing Hyper MTX, a brand new 1/8 scale electric four-wheel drive monster truck. Just came out about a month ago, and I've been bashing it, breaking it, fixing it, tuning, all that good stuff as usual. And we're doing the full review now, and the way this thing works is we do give it a rating in 5 different categories. It does come in 2 different versions: a ready to run, which sells for $730, obviously includes everything, electronics, everything that you need to drive except for batteries and a charger. Also comes in an almost ready to run, which is what I got. So the almost ready to run, you will have to provide your own electronics, your own radio, ESC, receiver and motor, and then you will have to paint the body. I painted mine in kind of the traditional Hobao blue, kind of a metallic blue, and then you do have to glue up the tires, which is not super hard, but obviously if you've never done that before, it will be easier to get the ready run. I already had pretty much a full-on 6S setup, which is what the regular ready run comes with, so I just bought the almost ready run, or the ARR, and yeah, we're going to be doing this review. So is this the most durable RC truck ever made? I actually think it is, and it does have one little caveat, and I'll explain that in the durability section, but this is pretty much the most durable RC car I've ever owned, and I found that pretty amazing and honestly a little mind-blowing. So the way the review works is we go through the 5 categories. We give it a rating from 1 to 5 stars. Obviously the most notable competitor to the MTX is going to be the Savage X Flux, which I also own from HPI Racing, but you could consider other 8-scale monster trucks like the Rival MT8, the Arrma Outcast 6S. You could consider maybe the eRevo 2.0 or the Sledge, even things like the Kraton 6S. So I do have all those vehicles, so I feel pretty comfortable giving it a rating and review. So in those 5 categories, 3 stars would mean average compared to all those other vehicles. 5 stars would be best in class, 1 star would be worst in class. And so yeah, let's get into the review. I'm not going to talk about the build too much because I did get the almost ready run, but yeah, the build out of the box, it does not have any oil in basically the front, center, and rear differential, so it's something to consider. I would recommend going with some oil. I'm running actually 20K in the front, 200K in the center, and 10K in the rear, so or 12K in the rear. You definitely want to throw in something. Electronics wise, I'm running basically a Team Crowley system, so Team Crowley ESC. I'm running the Team Crowley Curon 825 motor in there in the back, and then a Spectrum receiver and radio. And then servo wise, I'm running a Power Hobby 729 MBL there on the bottom. So I do have a build review on this vehicle. Builds, you know, with the almost ready run, it's pretty simple. If you ever paint a body or glue tires, pretty simple to install. The car comes apart pretty easily, so build went well. But the first category we're really going to talk about is the design. So obviously this is kind of similar to a Savage or Savage X. The HPI Racing, I think, was the inspiration for this vehicle. But whereas the Savage kind of really hasn't changed much through the years, it's been around, I don't know, 15, 20 years, something like that. This is almost like what the Savage would be if they had continued to pretty much develop that vehicle. The Hobao MTX is, I think, like the 4th iteration of the monster truck lineup. So they also have the MT Plus 2, the MT, so a lot of different vehicles. I think this is the 4th generation basically, and you can tell it still kind of has a little bit of a savageness to it, but it is actually quite different. So again, all aluminum 7075 chassis. It's not full-on twin vertical plate. It actually has bottom rails here on the bottom, basically more like a U-shaped or C-shaped C-rail is how I would describe it. It does have the batteries on the sides like a Savage, electronics up front, obviously steering receiver there in the front, motor and ESC there in the back, and then a transmission case in the middle with the center differential, which is pretty nice. It does have 4 aluminum shocks all the way around. They are 17mm bore, a little bit bigger than your typical 6S vehicle. So most 8 scales are going to have 16mm bores. These are just a little bit bigger. Now the MTX is actually very heavily based on the predecessor, the MT Plus 2, which was a little bit of a larger vehicle. That was 1/7 scale, and a lot of people liked it, but kind of felt it was almost a little too big. So with the MTX, they decided to shrink it a little bit. It is closer to a full-on A scale, a little bit big for an A scale, honestly. I mean, the tires on this thing are gigantic, but they considered A scale, so that's how we're going to review it. It is quite heavy. I think it weighs somewhere around 13.5 pounds, ready to run without batteries. So depending on the weight of your batteries, obviously that's going to affect the weight. But you know, most A scale 6S vehicles are more in like the 10 to 12 pound range. So this is pretty heavy for a stock, ready to run A scale. So yeah, that is kind of one of its familiar design elements. Super robust, large turnbuckles, front and rear. Does have adjustable tow in the rear, obviously steering links in the front to adjust tow. Pretty symmetrical design front and back. Does have nice shock protectors in the front, a really nice shock tower on top, including like a big old bumper there, padded foam on top, so if you land on the roof for whatever reason, it will actually absorb the shock pretty good. Receiver box here in the front is pretty much the same as their Nitro battery tray. I think they just reuse it just without the cutouts for the on-off switch and stuff like that, or the different servos. But yeah, humongous receiver box, so you can definitely use different size components there. Super massive differentials front, center, and rear. The steel spur gear is really nice. This has got probably the beefiest drivetrain of any vehicle I've ever seen. It does have universals front and rear, so a little bit different. They're not CVAs, they're not dog mounts, they're actually universals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because a little bit of design issue. One thing you'll notice is that this thing has humongous tires, way bigger than your normal A-scale vehicle, and it actually doesn't allow the chassis to touch the ground under full compression. So a little bit of a design flaw in my opinion. They do have spacers here on the shocks, external limiters to limit that compression, but even if you remove that, you really can't go that direction because the universals start to bind at full compression. So really the right design change in my opinion is to go with a little bit smaller tires. That's just kind of the way it is. Battery trays here, left and right, a lot better than the Savage battery trays. You will require two 2S or two 3S packs, and they are kind of standard size, so you really want something in that kind of 25 to 33 millimeter width or height batteries. You don't want super thick batteries, otherwise you will have to flip these around and basically run them sort of backwards or inverted or whatever. I mean, it will work, but you just have less protection. So I do think it's a little bit better to probably get soft packs or hard packs that will fit in this 25 to 33 millimeter range. And then in terms of length, I think the absolute maximum is something like 155 millimeters, but you really need space for the wiring, so you really want something more in like the 145 millimeter range or less. It does also have Delrin pistons in the shocks, 4mm shock shafts. They have this special coating, this black coating, I don't know, like a diamond light coating or something like that. A little bit changed from the MTX. They also did change the shock pistons as well. They went to 3 by 1.6 millimeter pistons front and rear rather than the 6 by 1.6 millimeter pistons front and rear that they used to have on the MT Plus 2. Not too much else to note. I mean, the ESC tray will match a Max 8 or Team Crowley ESC perfectly, so you can actually bolt it on securely. I just use an additional zip tie to hold it in place, but it's nice that, you know, it kind of uses a standard Hobby Wing bolt pattern. That's pretty cool. Downsides. I think the shock pistons are actually too small. 3 by 1.6 is not enough flow basically in the pistons. You will actually run into issues cracking the pistons. I did that on both the front and rear. The universals, again, like I mentioned, they do bind at full compression. So it is kind of set up so that the chassis can't go down all the way, but in my opinion that puts way too much stress on the shocks, on the shock rod ends, even the screws and stuff like that, so I don't really recommend that. The shocks will also kind of gouge into the shock tower on occasion, so you'll see kind of these wear marks here on the shock collars or shock caps. The truck is actually pretty easy to work on, a lot better than the Savage. I mean, you can get to the differential here from the bottom. It's just like 4 screws to pop that thing out. The front and rear are a little bit more difficult because you actually have to lift the discs up a little bit from the chassis. They're kind of mated into the chassis, so they're kind of keyed into the aluminum chassis. It's a little bit more work than a typical A scale. But yeah, overall design wise, I'm gonna give it 4 stars. I think it's one of the better ones out there. I don't think it's best in class, but you know, certainly within the A-scale 6S monster truck class, it is definitely a pretty good design, fairly easy to work on. Does make a whole lot of sense, except for those shock sort of issues. Now, how does the MTX drive? It drives like a monster truck, super stiff, super heavy. There's pretty much no flex within the chassis whatsoever. The 7075 chassis, super tough. I mean, especially with the C-rail type thing, there is no flex at all. It drives very, very stiff. It's also very heavy. It does feel a bit more like a sim scale monster truck rather than a lighter weight A scale. So a little bit slower to change direction. You feel the mass, especially up in the air. It doesn't rotate as well and do backflips and stuff as some other vehicles. It does okay with these massive tires, but like I mentioned, I do think it's actually a little bit better with smaller tires, just from the design standpoint. The reason they got these humongous tires is that it won't really backflip all that well without gigantic tires like this. So a little bit of an issue there. I think the tires themselves, traction is decent, you know, on grass. High traction dirt, probably okay, but if you're on loose dirt, something like a Badlands or backflips or something like that, will actually provide better traction. These are mediocre tires in my opinion on real dirt. On pavement, they're going to be totally fine, no issues there. So yeah, driving wise, you know, when you compare this to a Savage, I actually think the Savage drives amazing. One of the best handling full-on monster trucks out of the box in my opinion. MTX, I don't think drives as well as the Savage. Power-wise is obviously going to depend on your power system. I think the ready-to-run power system is actually very, very similar to the Savage power system. They both have basically a rebranded Hobby Wing, quick one 150 amp ESC. I think motor specs are very, very similar. So yeah, power-wise, I think you're going to be very comparable. But handling-wise, I do think the Savage shocks work a little better. Now, the Savage is not as durable, but it does have better tires. It does have a little bit better shock package in my opinion, a little bit better tuned out of the box. The Savage again has some durability issues, but the way it drives, which is what performance is all about, I think this is kind of average. In the performance category, 3 stars, it's average, it's not bad. You know, the servo saver is adjustable, that's nice. If you have a powerful servo like I do, then you have no issues with the steering. Tire traction, kind of adequate, but not really exceptional. So yeah, performance wise, I think it's kind of average. Now really the strong point of the MTX is this is pretty much the most durable RC car I've ever owned, and I've had a lot. I have every A scale, I have nearly every 10 scale, I have a large scale vehicles. So I'm very familiar with pretty much every basher you can find. And I was kind of shocked how durable this thing is, but with one exception, and that is the shocks. The shocks have proven to me to not be super durable, actually kind of the weak point of this vehicle. The vehicle itself, nearly unbreakable. I haven't broken anything on the vehicle. Even the body, I did like a huge jump in the air, did like 1.5 backflips, landed directly onto the roof, and like it didn't even really break. I mean, I got some cracks and stuff forming, but you know, with that pad, with that shock tower, like nothing broke. I was shocked. But the shocks, yeah, I've had many issues. I've actually bent 2 of the shock shafts. I've broken one, actually snapped at the rod end. I've broken 2 of the pistons. The shock caps are getting gouged. I did try some armor shock shafts as well. That actually also bent. So yeah, overall, I do feel like the shocks are not quite right. Funny thing enough is that I am actually basically running the MT Plus 2 shock package now. So I'm running the MT Plus 2 shock shafts, I'm running the MT Plus 2 shock pistons. I'm still running the orange springs front and rear, which I think is totally fine. And then shock oil rise, I'm running 575 CST front, 500 rear, which is somewhere in like that. I think about 42.5 weight, 40 weight shock oil package. So that seems to have mostly fixed the problem. I am also running the rear shock shafts all the way outside on the shock tower. That just makes it a little bit more of a 90-degree angle on compression, because I found under like massive jumps, you know, we're talking like 20-foot jumps, it would basically compress about halfway, and then the arm was deflecting so much it would actually bend the shaft probably about halfway through the stroke. This keeps it a little bit more vertical. I think it keeps it a little bit more perpendicular to the arm, and that way the shock, you know, shaft is just going straight up and down rather than trying to bend in half. That seems to have fixed the problem. So all those changes, I think it now actually is capable of doing those gigantic jumps, and so that's why I would do if you're having issues with the shock shafts. Also make sure your shock cap retainer rings up top are also always have the gouge pointing towards the shock tower. You really can't do a whole lot about that. You know, maybe in the future they'll have different shock standoffs or something, but yeah, a little bit of an issue there. It's mostly cosmetic, so not not a big problem. But yeah, that is really the issue I have. But the rest of the vehicle, unbreakable in my opinion. I have not broken anything on the truck itself. The turnbuckles are massive, the arms are massive, the chassis is still straight. Even landing it upside down on the shock tower and stuff. This thing's like pretty much unbreakable. I used to think the Max was the most durable RC car I've got, but I would say the MTX is actually the most durable RC car I own. So yeah, super impressive durability. Obviously it gives it 5 stars, not even within only the 186S class, but throughout every RC car you can buy, this is a beast. This is almost indestructible. Just kind of tune the shocks a little bit. I think Hobao is actually working on a little bit of updates to the shocks, but we'll see. That would be my only concern or complaint. Hobao is definitely a smaller brand here in the US. It's going to be hard to find parts at any hobby shops. I don't know of any that actually carry Hobao parts. Even looking online, you know, all your usual suspects like A-Main or Horizon Hobby or Tower Hobbies or whoever does not carry any parts. There's a Hobao Racing group, so online, go check them out. Check them out on Facebook. You can actually join that and, you know, probably get a little more support that way. There are a couple of dealers and stuff, but for the most part, Hobao parts going to be hard to find, and you're going to be basically ordering stuff online, waiting for stuff to show up in the mail. And so yeah, that's a bit of an issue or a bit of a downside. There are parts available. I had no issues actually ordering the parts I want, but you end up having to wait a week or so to get them in your mailbox. Maintenance wise, this is actually pretty good. It's not perfect. I think they're easier to maintain vehicles, but the servo is pretty easy to access. The electronics tray stuff easy to access. The motor mount is easy to access. The discs are not too bad. Even the center diff, I think it's 4 screws to remove the mount, and then another 4 screws to remove those individual attachment points, and then like another, I guess another 4 screws to actually split the transmission. But to get to the center differential, it's like 12 screws. Not too bad. Certainly compared to the Savage, it's just way easier to work on. Compared to all the A-scale 6S vehicles out there, not super easy to work on, but it is totally fine. Actually, probably average or above average in that category. But because of support, because Hobao USA honestly is a little bit more difficult to work on, they're not super responsive. You can call them, they may not answer you, all that kind of stuff. And certainly because you can't ever find parts at any hobby shops, I gotta give it below average rating score in the support and maintenance category. I'm gonna give it 2 stars. A little bit more difficult to get parts. Fortunately, you can get parts, but you're just gonna have to wait for them a little bit. The MTX sells for $730 for the full-on ready-to-run version and $530 for basically the almost ready-to-run or almost like a roller EXP type of vehicle if you're familiar with any ARMAs out there. So yeah, price-wise, it's not cheap. Honestly, prices throughout RC have been going up. This, in my opinion, is actually a little bit more of a premium vehicle. It is made in Taiwan. It does have the 7075 shock tower, 7075 chassis. All the screws and stuff are really nice. The discs are amazing. Super nice spiral cut machined differentials, much bigger than you would typically find. I mean, it's even got the motor mount attachment point here for the clamp on the back, includes a fan mount, a heatsink, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, really nicely equipped vehicle. When you look at this parts on this thing, it looks closer to what you would expect from a race vehicle from TLR or Team Associated or any of those brands that makes full-on race vehicles. And you know, I'm really impressed with the quality of this vehicle. I think it's actually really high, especially for a basher, but the price is obviously quite high. So by comparison, something like a Savage X from HPI is $765. So actually a little bit more and quite a bit more poorly equipped. The Savage definitely quality-wise is a step down or even 2 steps down. Something like an ARMA EXP sells for $470. So again, you know, compared to the roller of this thing, yeah, it's cheaper, but the almost ready to run here, 60 bucks more, but you get way more high quality components. Again, the machining, the quality, even the screws and stuff I think are better. The plastics, everything are better on this vehicle. So yeah, I don't think it's, you know, overpriced from that category. So all the way around, price-wise, I think it's competitive. Obviously, $730 is quite a bit for a ready-to-run. $530 is actually quite a bit for a roller, but I think you kind of get what you pay for. So in the value category, I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I think it's fair. I think it's about average. It's not an amazing deal. It's not overpriced. It's just kind of typical, and I think you get what you pay for, which is what the value category is all about. So final thoughts on the Hyper MTX from Hobao Racing. Very impressed with this vehicle. The very first video I ever did on the channel was a Hobao Hyper 10 TT. At the time, I was not super impressed with that vehicle, but I didn't really quite understand it as well, and it was also fairly old even when I picked that thing up. But it's nice to get a more recent offering from Hobao Racing. The MTX is amazing. It's a different type of vehicle for sure. It's not like any other 1/8 scale monster truck out there. It is bigger, it's heavier, it's more beefy. It's crazy durable as well, but it does have a couple weird design flaws with like the shocks and the tires and that kind of thing, which I think, you know, maybe with a little bit of tuning adjustment, it will be fine. You do have to spend probably $20, $25 worth of parts to get the shocks back to where they were with the Hyper Plus 2. I think that will make it a lot more durable. I think tire-wise, yeah, these work out of the box, but really the chassis should be able to touch the ground, because under massive jumps, under huge landings, you really want the chassis to be able to touch the ground so that not all the shock and force and everything are being applied to these tiny little shock shafts and screws and pistons and stuff like that. That is really something that every RC car should be able to do. So yeah, in my opinion, the MTX, great vehicle. I'm super happy to have picked this thing up. I just bought it like any other normal person, so no special consideration here. But I am quite impressed with the Hobao Racing MTX. I'm really glad I got it. Certainly a worthy competitor to the Savage. If you're a big fan of the Savage, I can't see how you're not a big fan of this vehicle, because in almost every way, they've actually kind of taken that platform and gone to where it needs to be or could be or should be, whatever. I don't think it drives as well as the Savage, so that's kind of the one downside. I would say the Savage actually, driving performance wise, is actually a little bit better, but this thing is like 1,000 times more durable. So for those of you that always, you know, complain about breaking your vehicles, this thing is super tough, and I'm not worried about ever breaking this thing except for the shocks when I take it out. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Hobao Hyper MTX. Let me know what you think. I know it's not a popular brand, not a popular vehicle, but those of us who kind of know about Hobao kind of know this is pretty exceptional vehicle. So let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit the like, share, subscribe buttons. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.